Hello viewers, welcome to A British Audiophile. Those of you who've followed this channel for a while will be aware that whenever I've reviewed a horn speaker, I've usually got a smile on my face. There's just something about a good horn speaker, a horn tweeter in particular, in the way it energizes the mid frequencies and the high frequencies that brings music to life in a way that a conventional driver can't do. The most accomplished one that I've reviewed so far is the Triangle 40th Anniversary Comet that retails here in the UK for around £1,500. Now I'm just going to stop and ask myself a question here. If I was choosing to put together a system around a speaker for that kind of price, would it be the 40th anniversary that I'd actually choose? Now, despite the fact that it does certain things that no other speaker around that price I've heard can do, namely make music sound real, ultimately the answer would be no. I'd choose the Amphion Argon 1, which is around £1,200 or £1,300 depending on the finish that you go for, and was my speaker of the year in 2021. It's a better all-rounder, and that brings me to some of the issues that I've had thus far with horn speakers. Yes, a good horn speaker can impart a wonderful energy to the music, but I've yet to find one within its market segment that's the last word when it comes to clarity and precise stereo imaging. Both are characteristics that I'm not prepared to compromise on, and even the most refined horn designs occasionally let you know that you're listening to a horn speaker. Today I'm reviewing the JBL 4309, a speaker that retails here in the UK for £1,899, and I requested this from JBL's PR department for a particular reason. They're owned by Harman Audio Luxury Group that's headed up by Dr. Sean Olive, and they're very much in the measurements are everything kind of camp. So you can bet your bottom dollar that they've done their due diligence and the measured performance of this speaker is as good as it possibly can be. That's traditionally an area where horn speakers have fallen down and accounts for, to some extent at least, their quirkiness. So could it possibly be that this is the horn speaker that has all the strengths of that particular type of design without any of the drawbacks? That's what I wanted to find out. I hope you hang along for the ride as well. The JBL 4309 is what I'd consider a mid-sized two-way stand mount speaker measuring 419 by 260 by 227 millimeters or 16.5 by 10.2 by 8.9 inches. Each speaker weighs in at 11 kilograms or 24.2 pounds. It's an impressively built speaker where everything you touch feels substantial and well finished. Although it's available in a black finish, I much prefer the real walnut wood veneer. A twin front-ported design, the 165mm 6.5-inch mid-woofer cone is made from a pure paper pulp, a material that's prized for imparting a natural tonality. JBL's 25mm 1-inch 2410H2 compression tweeter is made of a pair of lightweight polymers with V-shaped ring diaphragms, which are supposed to improve high-frequency extension and reduce the distortion associated with breakup modes. The tweeter sits in JBL's HDI waveguide, which stands for High Definition Imaging. Its intended purpose is to control directivity to give a smooth in-room response by seamlessly integrating with the mid-woofer. The high-frequency tone adjuster allows you to subtly adjust the sound to suit your environment or preference, working with the crossover network, which is set at 1600 Hz. I actually prefer the aesthetics of the 4309 with the navy blue grills in situ. It presents a clean front fascia and didn't seem to have any significant detriment on sonic quality. Below the label on the rear are two sets of fairly standard quality binding posts, which allow you to bi-wire or bi-amp the speakers. If you're using one cable though, ditch the supplied brass links for some decent quality connectors. One of the first things that strikes you about the 4309s is that it has that horn magic, and it's most noticeable when you're listening to simpler music or live recordings, especially female vocals, jazz pieces or classical pieces when there aren't a lot of instruments in the mix. So let me give you an example One of my favourite artists is Chet, and one of my favourite tracks of his is Almost Blue. There's a beautiful accompanying piano to this track, as well as Chet's trumpet, which has this warmer, richer, smoother tone than you'll typically experience from someone like Miles Davis. Now I have to say that I'm more of a fan of Chet's trumpet playing than I am of his singing, but this is simply a beautiful track to chill out to. Don't worry, I'll place a link to it in the description of this video. What you get a great sense of with the 4309s, and this is true of the Triangle 40th Anniversary Comet as well, is that the instruments are playing in the room with you. And in this particular regard, they're unmatched with conventional driver speakers around this price or above. And I include the ATC SCM19 as well as my ProAct Response 1 SCs when it comes to describing this particular characteristic. Okay, we get it, I hear you cry. It has that horn magic. But what about the other stuff? Well, when it comes to clarity, this is where the 4309s leave the 40th anniversary triangles behind. There's much better instrument separation and it's much easier to track the individual instruments within the mix. But that isn't to say that all of you will prefer the 4309s over the 40th anniversary. The 40th anniversary have a richer, warmer tone, which in itself is quite seductive. In fact, when it comes to clarity, with simpler music, the 4309s are on par with the Buchar S400 Mark IIs, and that's no faint praise by any regard. When it comes to more complex music, I'm talking about large-scale orchestral pieces, pop and rock tracks where you might have a lot going on in the mix. It falls behind the class leaders. It just sounds a little bit more compressed and congested. I wouldn't describe it as bad, it's still good, but no longer excellent as it is with more stripped back recordings. It's a very well balanced speaker. JBL haven't gone for any sonic fireworks. Bass has excellent definition and there's no noticeable bleed through to the mid-range, which means that variations in tone in the low frequencies are very easily made out. But they haven't bumped up the bass. I think officially it tails off at minus 6 dBs at 42 Hz. For a speaker around this size, that's nothing exceptional. It's not going to compete with the Buchar S400s when it comes to bass extension. So I think for bass heads out there who like a little bit of extra bass emphasis, they're going to be looking to add a subwoofer. I've already talked about the excellent tonality in the mid-range, but I think it's useful to break things down a little bit further. Leading edges of notes are very clearly defined, and the background is black enough to allow a beautiful decay to reveal itself, especially with simple recordings. This is a slightly mid-centric speaker. There's a little bit of prominence in the mid-range, not so much in the lower mid-range. There's just enough body to allow warmth and a natural tonality to come through to instruments and vocals. More so, I think, in the presence region, around between 2 and 4,000 Hz. It's not bright or aggressive by any means. It's not far from a bright and aggressive speaker, in fact, but enough to give it a little bit of energy and excitement, allow the performers to come and sit a little bit more forward. When it comes to actually layering back to front, this speaker does very well. Yeah, lead instruments and vocals do sit in front of the speakers, but there's also some layering behind the speakers. It's not the widest when it comes to soundstage width, certainly would be surpassed by most other speakers around this price, but that can be corrected to some extent by careful positioning. The tweeter is extremely well behaved. It's as well behaved as any horn-loaded speaker that I've listened to at this point, but it's not perfect. There is a touch of nasal quality that creeps in occasionally. I think it was most obvious when I was listening to Dire Straits' Sultans of Swing and Mark Knopfler's guitar solos, but you're not going to hear it on every track and it's not going to be annoying. And by far, the benefits of this horn design outweigh the negatives. When it comes to top-end extension, there's a nice top-end extension. It's not the most detailed tweeter that I've heard, not the most airy on top, and that's perhaps why it doesn't sound bright. Nothing sounds dark and recessed though either. The JBL 4309 isn't really suitable for near-field listening. There's too much distance from the center point of the tweeter to the center point of the midwoofer for that kind of arrangement to work. So I think you need to maintain a distance of around 2 meters, which is about 6.5 feet. What it's exceptionally good at, though, is low-level listening, where most speakers, when it gets to around 60 dBs or below, just sound dull and lifeless. That isn't the case here at all, and that has to be a benefit of this well-implemented horn design. The treble adjustment on the front of the speaker is subtle but useful. It allows you to tailor the sound to some extent for your own particular setup or taste. I think what most people are likely to want to do when positioning these speakers in their room is to compensate for the limited amount of soundstage width. That's my main criticism of this speaker, so this is what I wound up doing. I had the speakers slightly wider apart than I would ordinarily, with a little bit more aggressive towing, not pointing directly at my ears, but directly at my shoulders. What that allowed me to do was to increase soundstage width whilst maintaining a solid center image. And having the tweeters pointed pretty much directly to my ears weren't an issue because I didn't partner it with overly bright sounding amplifiers, and the speaker isn't overly bright either to begin with. Being a front ported speaker with a wide front baffle and a relatively shallow depth would lead me to believe that this speaker is designed to work well close to walls. And the reality is, yeah, you can get away with placing the 4309s a little bit closer to the wall than most stand mount speakers around this size. But I think most of you who follow this channel will know exactly what I'm going to say here. If you want to minimize time smearing and improve clarity, you need to pull them out. I mentioned amplifiers, so let's talk about partnering equipment. The 4309s are rated at 4 ohms and 87 dB sensitivity. On paper, they should be fairly difficult to drive, but that wasn't my experience with the amplifiers I tried them with. And I think for a couple of reasons. The likelihood is when the impedance curve is plotted of this amplifier, it's going to be fairly flat. And most modern amplifiers are going to deal with that these days, no problem at all. And the second reason is I think that simply JBL have been honest about the ohm rating of this speaker. Most modern manufacturers producing speakers out there rating them at 8 ohms, and even some of those rated at 6 ohm simply aren't. And I have to commend JBL for that. It's a source of a potential rant for me, which I'm going to avoid today. I think as long as you've got a price appropriate amplifier with around 50 watts on tap, you're going to be absolutely fine. The Arta VX SA3 at £399 is not a price appropriate amplifier, but even that did a reasonable job of driving them. Did it get the best out of them? Heck no. The 4309s are going to pair well with a wide range of amplifiers. Sure, they have a little bit of coloration in the mid-range, slightly mid-centric presentation, a little bit of forwardness in that area as well, but it's not significant enough to impose a great amount of character on the music or the partnering equipment that you choose to place with it. I paired it up with a Wilsington R8 with upgraded PS Vane tubes, and that warm, rich, muscular presentation that I love about the R8, that was there in spades. I think I'm going to rename the Hagel H190 Mr. Consistent because it works so well with such a wide range of speakers, imparting very little character and allowing the 4309s to shine. The Exposure 2510 sits tonally in between the warm, rich Wilsington and the neutral sounding Hagel, and was another amplifier that paired extremely well. I even dragged out my Exposure 21 preamp and 18 super monoblocks, which I've pretty much retired from reviews because I was curious to find out how well this speaker scaled up. They did really well. I was smiling from ear to ear most of the time, and for a change I wasn't in a desperate hurry to swap in my Proax, and that's how good these speakers are. With the 4309s, JBL have produced a well-built, nicely balanced, detailed sounding speaker that retains that performer in your living space kind of feel I've only really heard from good horn designs. Is it possible to have your cake and eat it, have all the benefits of a horn design without any of the drawbacks? Well, the 4309 comes much closer to that ideal than I thought was possible at this price. It's not perfect though. Its qualities do diminish with more complex recordings, and you have to be careful with speaker positioning to mitigate against the limited soundstage width. That prevents it from being a benchmark in my book, but this is a highly accomplished speaker that comes highly recommended from this channel. Do you know what? If I had the space for a second proper system, not something placed in my son's playroom or a bedroom, but properly set up in a room, I wouldn't mind building a system around a speaker like this. My question of the day is, if you had a second system, what would it be? Would it be the same or would it be different to your primary system, and the reasons why? Perhaps you already have one if you're lucky enough to be in that position. Please share that in the comments section. All that remains for me to say is if you like this video, if you like what I'm doing with this channel and you want to see it grow, please do all that social media stuff and check me out on Patreon for consultancy services and the bonus content that I offer. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.